Midway through the American Civil War, a variety of coastal and riverine ironclads had been tried. The Confederate Navy tended to prefer what's been broadly defined as a casemate ironclad, which underwater resembles a regular ship, if sometimes with a bit of a shallow draft, and above water tends to look like an angry Toblerone box with sloped ends. Although, hilariously, they also tried to make armoured paddle wheel vessels, see the screen, and, that wasn't just limited to the Confederacy. The Union, on the other hand, had expanded out, again for the most part, from their original USS Monitor to the Passaic and Canonicus classes, which built on the proven formula, proven at least in calm waters, of a raft-type hull with a cylindrical turret stuck on top. This allowed for the mounting of fewer but heavier guns compared to their opponents. Visually, the upper deck of these vessels was getting a little bit busier, with observation towers or pilot houses placed atop the turrets, more funnels, and more air intakes, the latter being a very welcome addition for the crews. But they were limited in gun battery to the 2-gun capacity of the single Erickson turret. Ideally, this needed to be increased, since even as early as the fight between USS Monitor and CSS Virginia, there had been problems bringing the guns to bear when Monitor's turret drive system broke down, and the massive Dahlgren guns were not exactly rapid firing, especially given that some of the Monitors were now using the 15-inch version as compared to Monitor's original 11-inch. Logically, you could just add more turrets. A multi-turreted ship wasn't a new idea even in 1863. The bigger issue was draft. The naval element of the American Civil War was mostly being fought on the coasts and rivers of North America, and neither of these environments offered all that much in the way of deep water. 2 big, heavy armoured turrets would make a ship sit significantly deeper in the water, which in turn might limit their capabilities, especially since the presence of Confederate Navy ironclads and fortifications on or next to the rivers was more pressing than the oceanic blockade, which was better supplied with more conventional ships by this time. To square this circle, a design was prepared that was about 14.5 foot wider and 50 foot longer than the original Monitor, displacing about 1,300 tons, which was about a third more than Monitor, but with an intended draft of only 6 feet, as compared to Monitor's 10. The Milwaukee class was designed primarily to operate on rivers. Top speed was a stately 9 knots in a flat calm, assuming that the 7 boilers and 2 engines driving 4 shafts via a rather complicated gearing system to keep each screw small enough to maintain a shallow draft had all decided to work for that particular day. 4 ships were ordered: Milwaukee, Chickasaw, Kickapoo, and Winnebago, continuing a tradition of naming many, but not all, Monitors after either Native American tribes or locations and rivers with Native American names. Armament consisted of 4 11-inch Dahlgren guns in a pair of twin turrets, one fore and one aft of the minimal other structures that were found amidships. On 3 of the ships, the forward turret was built to the design of James Eads, while the aft turret used the Erickson design of earlier US Monitors. The Eads turret, using steam power for almost every function, was somewhat more akin to modern turrets, as it rotated on bearings instead of solely on a spindle compared to the Erickson, whilst it also allowed for greater elevation and thus, in theory, more range, although this increased elevation was more useful for shore bombardment, especially for engaging fortifications on embankments, than it was for ship-to-ship combat. Chickasaw, the odd one out, was built with 2 Erickson turrets. As US iron manufacturing was only just about capable of producing the thicker plates needed for ironclads, and then in very limited quantities, the ship's armour was made up instead of layers of much thinner sheets, much as Monitor's was. The turrets had 8 inches of iron, which was composed of multiple 1-inch thick plates. The rather minimally profiled sides had 3 inches of armour that used the same technique, and the deck used a 3/4-inch plate with a slope on it to minimise profile, whilst also allowing the crew to stand, at least as the face stayed near the centre line. Milwaukee and Winnebago added another 3/4-inch sheet to their decks for a 1.5-inch total thickness, although the effective thickness of laminated armour made up of the same materials is considerably less than a monolithic slab of the same depth. A small elevated pilot house got 3 inches of armour, similar to the sides. Although mainly riverine, the ships would occasionally be taken along the coast for other operations, such as the Battle of Mobile Bay, where Chickasaw and Winnebago took part in engaging the defences, with the latter also taking on survivors from the Tecumseh when that monitor hit what we would now call a mine, but at that point was called a torpedo, and sank rather rapidly. Both ships would also engage the CSS Tennessee, with Chickasaw able to eventually force it to surrender despite not being able to penetrate its armour by virtue of blowing away the Tennessee's steering chains, which had been left exposed, thus crippling it. Various operations against Confederate shipping and fortifications would follow, with Milwaukee falling victim to another mine on the Blakely River, although this time without loss of life, as Kickapoo was at hand to take off the crew, and the larger size of the Milwaukee class meant they did take just a little bit longer to sink. Almost as soon as the war was over, the three survivors were decommissioned, changing names briefly whilst in reserve in 1869 to Samson, Cyclops and Tornado, and then reverting back a month later, with the exception of Kickapoo, which went from Cyclops to Kewadin. All three were then sold in 1874, with two of them being scrapped, and Chickasaw being renamed yet again, in fact reverting back to Samson, and then being used as a coal barge for half a decade before she was yet again renamed, now called Goldsboro, and converted to a paddle wheel drive. Her flat upper surface having long since lost its turrets, she proved ideal for use as a train ferry, with considerably more superstructure than she'd ever had previously. She served in this role until the time of World War II, when she was put aside as a general works barge, and then would rust out and sink through basic neglect about a decade later whilst on the Mississippi, where she would be rediscovered in the early 2000s, with apparent efforts to stabilise the wreck now underway.
That's it for this video. Thanks for watching. If you have a comment or suggestion for a ship to review, let us know in the comments below. Don't forget to comment on the pinned post for dry dock questions.